Children, women, men are all victims of human trafficking. It's women and girls, though, who are preyed upon more than anyone else. As the UN tries to get the world to stand against this tragically booming business, is there really any way to end it? This is Inside Story.
He locked me in the bathroom. I would beg him to let me go, but he kept me there for hours. I didn't have any power to free myself. I was his prey. Now he is the prey of the authorities. I am free from the way he had me for his abuse. He decided I was not a person, but he was the animal.
When officers came to the farm, the owner told us to say things which were different than the reality. The owner wanted to cover up the truth.
It's hard when you think that nobody really cares, and you think that, why is this happening to me? What did I do?
There you heard just 3 of the millions of people around the world who've become victims of perhaps the worst kind of exploitation. I'm Martine Dennis. Welcome to the programme. The United Nations has dedicated Sunday to standing against human trafficking as it tries to combat a cruel trade that only seems to be getting more lucrative and sophisticated. Now, the UN estimates that 21 million people are trafficked worldwide for sex, labour, or even for their organs. About half of them are in Asia, while 3.7 million are estimated to be in African countries, while millions more are trafficked across Europe, the Middle East and the Americas. Now, while people smuggling and human trafficking are linked, there are fundamental differences between the two. Smuggling involves refugees or migrants who are given help to enter a country illegally, whether to escape war, persecution or violence, or in search of a better life. Trafficking is when a person is taken somewhere under the threat or use of force, coercion or deception. Now, the Argentinian government says more than 10,000 victims of human trafficking have been rescued there over the past 10 years. Almost half of those had been trafficked for sex. It says the problem is not just confined to Argentina, but the entire continent. Teresa Bo reports now from Buenos Aires.
Alaa was flown from her hometown in the province of Córdoba to Argentina's southern tip in Tierra del Fuego when she was 18 years old. She was desperate for a job. She was offered an airplane ticket to work in a bar in Ushuaia.
It was like a factory. You're at their expense. They're the ones who pay you and order you around. You can't complain if you're beaten or raped. The torture is permanent. They make you feel like you're nothing.
5 years ago, Alaa was rescued. She eventually decided to go after the owner of a brothel in which she was forced to work. Alaa also became the first survivor of human trafficking in Argentina to win a civil trial for damages.
There was a prostitution industry. The women who arrived on the island were checked by the local police, and from there we were given a health card by the municipality. After the checked, we had no diseases.
Alaa's case is not the only one where criminal organizations were found to have worked hand in hand with local authorities.
In 2008, Argentina passed a legislation to fight and punish people's trafficking, including that of women and children. Since then, it's become more difficult to spot brothels on the streets of Buenos Aires. But in areas such as this one, there's victims almost everywhere.
In Constitución, we met Maria, not her real name. She works as a prostitute. She's from Chaco in northern Argentina, one of the poorest provinces in the country. She left home when she was 13 and was taken to another province where she was enslaved in a brothel.
Everything was arranged with the mayor. There's a lot of trafficking there. I escaped. I spent a full night in the woods and found a truck driver that helped me come back to Buenos Aires.
In recent years, Argentina's government has stepped up efforts to fight trafficking, setting up a hotline, promoting cooperation among government agencies, and trying to assist victims. Maria Fernanda Rodriguez and Zaida Gatti are leading the fight.
When you're vulnerable, the chains that trap you are not physical, they're much more subtle. We're trying to set up a policy over what to do with the money recovered so it would assist the victims, because many of the women rescued do not have anything.
After the trial, Alaa Kassab was forced to leave Tierra del Fuego, fearing for her life. She now lives with her 6 children in the capital. But there are thousands of others who cannot find their way out. Alaa says she is an example that it can be done and is trying to help others do the same. Teresa Bo, Al Jazeera, Buenos Aires.
All right, let's bring in our guests now. In New York, we have Justin Forsyth, Deputy Executive Director of UNICEF. Joining us on Skype from Copenhagen is Alaa Kassab, who was smuggled from Syria to Europe and now works to uncover the crimes of people traffickers. In London, we have Greg O'Kelly, a barrister specialising in human rights and immigration law. Welcome to you all. Can I start with you, Alaa, because you are originally from Syria. In order to get to Denmark, you inhabited that world in which human traffickers operate. I mean, you were smuggled, and there's quite a smooth transition, isn't there, from human smuggling to human trafficking. Can you tell us what your observations were?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the first things you could notice, the difference between both categories, is actually the demand. The human smugglers, they don't work without a high demand from people who actually fled their countries because of they come from a war zone countries, because they want to seek an asylum in a European state, they want a better life. While the human traffickers, they don't care about the cause, maybe the root cause of people why they want to move. They try to actually have as much as they can customers so they can make their trade profitable.
Right, and how long did your journey being using human smugglers, how long did your journey take through Europe, from Turkey, I believe you started, going through Europe and then ending up in Denmark?
Yeah, for me, in total, it was 18 days from Turkey to Copenhagen, to Denmark. I tried during that time as much as I can not to use human smugglers. At some point, you have some obstacles, you cannot cross them yourself. You have to actually get some help from experts. I tried not to use human smugglers on the way, but I had to twice.
All right. Justin, coming to you now, the estimate of the number of children who are involved in this desperate trade varies, doesn't it? I've got a figure from the ILO of 1.2 million per year, but actually the full extent of human trafficking isn't really known, so therefore we don't really know the number of children caught up in it.
No, we don't know. And as you say, the difference between smuggling and trafficking is a little academic if you're a child. A lot of the children that we work with on this journey from West Africa through Libya into Europe, many of them into prostitution in Italy and other countries in Europe, they start being smuggled. They might leave home because there's violence, or they're fleeing early marriage or conflict in their country. And they voluntarily leave home and they think someone's going to help them. And on that journey, they're helped, sometimes even by a relative or friend as they first set off. But as they get on that journey, then they get passed hand to hand, often in somewhere like Niger, where they stay in migrant houses. These connection men then sell them sometimes to traffickers, or they can't afford to pay their way any longer, so they get then used as forced labour, or the girls get used as prostitutes. One girl I met talked about her family not able to pay any longer. They ring up and they beat you on the phone sometimes so your family pays more. If they can't pay anymore, she had to stay in Agadez in Niger for 18 months as a prostitute to pay the rest of her journey. Then she gets to the Libyan coast and it gets even worse. Treatment of children in the Libyan detention centres for these child migrants is just appalling. They're beaten, tortured, some are killed. especially in central Libya. Then they get on boats, sometimes they sink, many die. And then when they finally get to Italy, and I've met many of these children as they come off the boats in places like Catania in Sicily, they have telephone numbers and they're being met by the mafia, who then take them into railway stations and use them as prostitutes. So the difference between smuggling and trafficking isn't very clear.
Yeah, no, I fully get that. Greg, coming to you, human trafficking has always existed, no doubt will continue to do so. What do you think is the purpose or the effectiveness of a day, anti-human trafficking day, as proposed by the UN? What exactly can it achieve?
Well, it's hard to say what it's going to achieve. I mean, obviously, it's intended to bring an awareness to the issue. I would echo what Justin says about it being difficult to distinguish between trafficking and smuggling sometimes. My experience of representing young Afghan boys, particularly in the tribunal in London, is that what happens to them coming from Afghanistan via often Turkey and Europe to the United Kingdom is often very difficult to distinguish between from a pure trafficking exploitation situation. They often describe experiences of abuse and violence en route as well. And I've also represented a child who arrived in the United Kingdom in order to escape persecution. And then when subsequently his parents couldn't pay the traffickers in Afghanistan, ended up being trafficked within the United Kingdom and abducted off the street and brought somewhere where he was forced to work on a building site.
That's interesting, Greg, because, I mean, there is a direct correlation, isn't there, between poverty, human need, and conflict and human trafficking.
Well, exactly. I mean, the thing you have to remember when you're dealing with situations of trafficking and people smuggling is that the people involved are almost always very, very vulnerable. And people who are vulnerable, who approach smugglers, will often be targeted for trafficking. And often, as we've said, the distinction between trafficking and smuggling is difficult to make out. The people who are carrying out both are generally criminal gangs because of the fact that people are having to move illegally, often because there aren't safe routes to claim asylum legally within Europe. And
Justin, presumably that UNICEF seeks to identify those who are vulnerable before they're trafficked. Once they're trafficked, I suppose it's a matter of trying to offer them assistance, protection, and help to get away from the traffickers.
Exactly. I mean, the best way to address this problem is to stop children, particularly unaccompanied children, who are the most vulnerable to the prey of these traffickers or smugglers, from moving in the first place. And so we've got to break that connection in the countries of origin. The place where they're most vulnerable are these transit countries, whether it's in Central America, and this isn't just a problem from Africa or Afghanistan, it's also Central America into the US, whether they're in the hands of criminals and gangs or they're in failed conflict states like Libya. And there, I mean, it's just appalling. I've talked to children who talked about being in a detention centre in the middle of Libya, where they were executing 5 children every day, just taking them out because they couldn't pay to continue their journey. I've read stories also of very ill people just being left to die on the side of the route out on the track in the desert in between Agadez and Libya. And we know that children coming from Central America, fleeing gang violence often, are very vulnerable because they're being smuggled or trafficked by these coyote gangs, many of whom are also abusing those children en route.
And Alaa, tell us a bit about how you observed human traffickers operating within the refugee community that you were moving with, because as we know, millions of people have managed to escape from war-torn Syria. Tell us about how the human traffickers that you observed operated among that community.
If we want to talk in a comprehensive way, we cannot box all the traffickers and smugglers in one box. It's a secret city. We still find millions of people. They reach their destination. They actually achieved the dream for them through human smugglers, and they are grateful for that work without really experiencing any bad memories. On the other side, we have ruthless smugglers have capitalized their trade actually by using the lawlessness to expand their human trade, while migrants are routinely detained by armed groups, sometimes forced for being labor or prostitution. We cannot talk like they are only one type of smugglers. Also, by working with rescue, with the humanitarian organizations, we got to know from people actually on the way that they experienced awful stuff from smugglers, but still the blame to begin with on the root cause, that people, they went to smugglers and they asked them for help. So they don't blame them, they blame their countries sometimes, or the policies which brought people to that stage. They need to use human smugglers, and then they need to accept maybe any consequences after that, because there is no way back for people.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we've identified the problem, and as we've already said, it is big business, hugely lucrative is the business of human trafficking, and that makes it, of course, particularly difficult to stop. But there are some bright lights on the horizon, like US flight attendants. They're now being taught how to spot trafficking victims when they're on board planes. And in the US state of Texas, for instance, that is a well-known trafficking hub. Truck drivers are now required by law to get extra training to identify victims. And there's another way that many of us can actually help as well. There's a smartphone app. It's called Trafficking, and it encourages all of us as holidaymakers to upload pictures of our hotel rooms. And the idea is that police can then check adverts that are featuring suspected trafficking victims in hotel rooms against Trafficking's database of photographs. So coming back to you now, Justin, there are a few areas where we are trying to crack down on the issue of human trafficking. But as we've already also pointed out, it is immensely profitable, isn't it? So, I mean, the chances of stamping it out are very remote.
Yes, I think that they are remote at the moment, but as you say, there are very strong initiatives. Here in the US, there's an organisation called Polaris, which works to stop trafficking, but it also has a helpline, and thousands of victims of trafficking ring it up and get help and then get rescued from their trafficking situation, including many children. We have similar helplines run by the International Labour Organization or supported by them in a number of countries like Greece. I mean, I think as we heard a little bit earlier, we need safe and legal migration. I mean, the best way to stop this is to allow people to apply for asylum, to come on a safe journey rather than to risk their lives, whether it's from traffickers or smugglers, or to cross the middle of the Mediterranean in a small rubber dinghy. And the other way to tackle it is, and I agree, there is a difference between smuggling and trafficking, even though for children it often merges into the same. The other way to stop it is for law enforcement. Now, most of the money, $150 billion a year of business from trafficking, we can tackle that. Much of it is sent on mobile phones through internet banking, using ways of transferring money, and a lot of it is coerced from the people being trafficked, particularly children en route. Their families are forced to pay online. And so there must be ways that the law enforcement globally can clamp down on that. We have the means to fight terrorism and extremism by tracking it using lots of modern means. Surely we can do the same with traffickers.
All right, Greg, over to you. You're a lawyer operating in the United Kingdom. What do you think of the legal framework that exists at the moment?
Well, obviously it varies between different jurisdictions. In the United Kingdom, there are quite a lot of protections for trafficking, and there has been a lot of focus on trafficking the last few years. For example, we had the Modern Slavery Act just 2 years ago. There are policies in place that are designed to protect individuals. Some of them work quite well. They don't all work perfectly. There are some issues, for example, that people often have. Well, people have their decisions as to whether or not they're victims of trafficking, often made by the Home Office. And there's something of a tension there between the political pressure on the Home Office to keep numbers of asylum seekers and to keep numbers of migrants down. versus obviously the pressure that comes with the United Kingdom's obligations under the European Convention for Action Against Trafficking, and obviously the European Convention on Human Rights, which also has a prohibition against forced labour. So there are protections in place. As I said before, there are often numerous different competing problems that the vulnerable people who end up being trafficked have. So often there will be issues of asylum and other human rights considerations as well that need to be taken into account in their cases. But ultimately there are policies in place, and some of them are working reasonably well, I would say.
And Alaa, I was going to come to you next. Alaa, let's go back to your personal story, because I guess that you might feel somewhat fortunate in that, you had nasty experiences with smugglers, but you weren't ultimately trafficked.
Well, even though I wouldn't say I felt like I was trafficked, because I decided myself to go. I had the initiative to start the deal and to be the one who's asking for help to get to the other side. But if you take many other stories around me, I would say we saw many people who were actually mixed with migrants, and they were absolutely trafficked. They were just taken with their money, with all their belongings, and they were told that you're gonna go to your better destination. I would say, yes, I feel fortunate. I feel privileged after this happened. I wouldn't say, again, that we are talking about only one cause to the problem. It's not only human traffickers, it's actually the policies against the human traffickers without really seeing the main problem, the root cause. We know that after the last deal between Italy and the fragile government in Libya, give them all the equipment, money to fight the human traffickers, this will leave thousands of migrants in catastrophic circumstances without no help if they have no human traffickers. So here we have to see things more objectively. What about people who want the safe passage? What about people who want safe journey without risking it? And then we can provide that maybe without only attacking the human traffickers, maybe with providing another solution. And this is what actually the humanitarian organizations that they're trying to do. And they're facing a lot of criticism by being a big help for human traffickers.
Yeah, indeed. Justin, coming to you, I'm just wondering, as I've already said, that human trafficking has existed perhaps forever. But do you think that there is a significant change in terms of our threshold of tolerance, and that we as an international community are not prepared to accept it? Have we reached that point yet?
Yeah, I mean, we go back on human trafficking and we had slavery, so we've had it for a long time, and it's appalling. I think it has changed, though, and I think the organised nature of global crime, I mean, many of the traffickers in Central America or Africa, or even coming out of Afghanistan, are linked to crime syndicates globally and in Europe. And so this is massive organised business. Now, the smugglers, I agree, are slightly different from the traffickers, but they overlap. And we also know for children, there's a huge numbers of unaccompanied children, which seems to be growing, a fivefold increase in recent years. So within this story of trafficking and smuggling, it seems a lot of unaccompanied children are increasingly on the move, and they're very, very vulnerable to exploitation, abuse, rape, prostitution. So we need to address the root causes, as Alaa says, and whether it's violence or forced marriage or conflict, we need to protect children and others on the move, and we need to have a strong response to trafficking in terms of law enforcement. But when children get to safe havens like Europe or America or other parts of the world, we also need to look after them. I mean, Britain has done very well with its Modern Day Slavery Act, but it's also been very bad at protecting children who have been in Calais alone, who have been then preyed on by traffickers and smugglers and left living in a terrible camp and then dispersed across Europe. So we need a consistent and coherent response that addresses each of the different elements of the problem. And that's difficult, but it is possible. And I think we could do more than we're currently doing to protect particularly the most vulnerable people, including children, from these traffickers.
Thank you all very much indeed. We're now out of time. Justin Forsyth, Alaa Kassab and Greg O'Kelly, thank you all very much indeed. And as ever, thank you for watching the programme. You can see it again anytime you like by going to the website, aljazeera.com. If you want more discussion, you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. I'm @Martine Dennis. So from the whole team here in Doha, it's bye for now.